Hey there everyone, welcome to Tales in Text and I'm your host Nisha. I hope you're doing great and welcome to another book review. I know it's been a while, I think almost a month since I posted my last book review, but life got in the way and I was really busy. But I'm back today with a really interesting book, and it's actually a part of my ancient Indian classics series. I mean, this book is not super ancient, it just goes back to the 18th century, but it's old enough to find its place in that list. So without further ado, let me introduce the book for this video. So today I'm reviewing Radhika Santawanam, or The Appeasement of Radhika, written by Muddupalani. Radhika Santawanam is an 18th century poem written originally in Telugu. This book covers the love story and the sexual dynamics between Radha and Krishna, and what happens when Krishna gets married to Illa. So grab a cup of whatever you want to drink, get cozy, perhaps get something to eat, and let's dive right in. This is going to be a slightly long video because I'm going to be discussing a lot of important themes that I observed in this book. A little about Muddupalani first. So Muddupalani was the 18th century court dancer to King Pratap Simha, and King Pratap Simha was actually the ruler of Tanjore between 1730 and 1763 AD. He was the illegitimate son of Raja Tukkoji Bhosle and Raja Tukkoji Bhosle's concubine named Annapurna. So he didn't immediately ascend to the throne because obviously he was an illegitimate son, but he ascended it after the king's legitimate firstborn son died, and that gave Pratap Simha the way into kinghood. Pratap Simha met Muddupalani, and Muddupalani, who was born in 1739, was one of the most beautiful women in Tanjore, and he invited her to be part of his court, and soon he took her as his lover. And over the course of a few years, Muddupalani became Raja Pratap Simha's Bhoga Patni. Now, I did try to search for the meaning of these terms, but I couldn't find anything online. So I'm assuming that this will be some sort of an unofficial wife. I mean, that is my hypothesis, because as a court dancer, she couldn't have become his official wife because of the rules of the day. Now, Muddupalani herself, it isn't just her relationship with Pratap Simha that makes her stand out. As a woman, Muddupalani was not only exceedingly beautiful, but she was an extraordinary writer who really reveled in her craft as that of a courtesan and a court dancer. She was unabashedly, exploring the nuances of erotica, both in her profession and in writing. And she herself was the granddaughter of a very gifted and beautiful courtesan called Tanjanayaki. And Muddupalani was a brilliant musician, a singer. Let's say she was at the epitome of the arts, especially in her field. I want to read a bit about Muddupalani that has been written over here in the book. Muddupalani's beauty was matched only by her formidable intellect, sparkling wit and inimitable attitude, her artistic talents coming to the fore even before she attained puberty. An accomplished dancer, well versed in all aspects of Sri Ranga Rasa, she was a multi-linguist writing in Sanskrit, Tamil and Telugu. And so, apart from writing her own poetry and her prose, she was also adept at translating, and she did translate the Tamil sainted poetess Andal's Tirupavai, and she introduced novel experiments into this translation, experimenting with 7-line verses called Saptapadam, and for which she was rewarded by King Pratap Simha and also the literati of the day. But her very personal interest, amongst all of her literary creations, was her writings about Lord Krishna and his relationship with his gopis. And that's where Radhika Santawanam derived its inspiration. Now, apart from the story of Radha Krishna that came down from mythology itself, Radhika Santawanam is believed to reflect Muddupalani's tumultuous relationship and passionate relationship with King Pratap Simha, because apparently Muddupalani could be quite jealous if King Pratap Simha, gave his attention to another court dancer or courtesan. And there have been some instances recorded of the two of them engaging in really passionate verbose battles before reconciling into intense lovemaking. So all of these elements seem to lend themselves very well into Radhika Santawanam, which I will explore a little later as I describe the book and the things that I've observed. But it's safe to say that Muddupalani was quite an interesting woman, and also a very prolific writer who was cherished by the literati of the day, because when Radhika Santawanam was written, and I can attest to this after reading this book, there are quite a few pages describing sex in intimate detail, in very explicit detail, and they are really erotic in nature. And because of this, you would think that 18th century India would have been prudish, but not really. This was still at the beginning of the East India Company coming into India, and still we didn't have those colonial mindsets having settled in, those Victorian mindsets having settled in. And Pratapa and his court and other important literary figures during that time actually praised Muddupalani's work, praised Radhika Santawanam for expanding the genre of Telugu poetry, and for Muddupalani, showcasing such intense creativity and sensitivity in handling a theme such as erotica. One of the things that is mentioned in the introduction is the very clever way in which Muddupalani actually starts the narration of Radhika Santawanam. Understanding the reality of the changing dynamics, socio-cultural dynamics in India, Muddupalani knew that at some point in time her work may be criticized by people, and in order to avoid these criticisms, she actually used a very wonderful technique that you'll actually see in your epics such as Mahabharata or Ramayana, by setting this poem as a conversation between two very renowned religious figures or sages. Muddupalani actually sets the conversation as a dialogue between Maharishi Sukha and the scholar King Janaka. So you're having Sukha Muni talking to King Janaka, and they're having this conversation where Sukha Muni is relating this poem, this love story of Radha Krishna and their sexual exploits, to King Janaka, thereby lending credence and authority to this narrative, which cannot be challenged by people. So I think that's a really smart way to do things, don't you? Muddupalani passed away in the year 1790, leaving behind a corpus of work that was hailed as one of the best writings by Telugu women poets. And for some time after that, until the reign of Pratapa and for a couple of years after that, Muddupalani's work, including Radhika Santawanam, did shine in the literary circles of Tanjavur. But then, slowly, we found people criticizing Radhika Santawanam for its contents, labeling it obscene and disgusting, especially by upper class literati, Brahmins, who found fault with Radhika Santawanam for depicting a deity in a sexual relationship, or talking about the sexual exploits of a deity with a mortal. And people didn't like that, and so there's a lot of pushback from Indian scholars. At the same time, because of the colonial rule having been in great force or full swing by then, even the British puritanical and prudish mores led to the British overlords banning Radhika Santawanam from being ever read or published in India. So for over 150 years, the British had banned Radhika Santawanam, and all existing copies of Radhika Santawanam in Telugu or in any other translation were destroyed. This book would have been lost to history had it not been for the formidable determination and efforts of a woman called Nagarathnamma. And now let's talk about her. Nagarathnamma was born on 3rd November 1878, and she was essentially a child of a single mother. Her mother was abandoned by multiple people over the course of her life, and she single-handedly raised Nagarathnamma. And despite being faced with so many difficulties, at a time when, even today, single mothers don't have it easy, but in the 1870s to 1900s, it was significantly more difficult. And despite being raised in such difficult circumstances, Nagarathnamma and she ended up becoming one of the best dancers in South India, a literati once again in her own right, a wonderful writer, a wonderful musician, an extraordinary dancer, an extremely beautiful woman. And in fact, it was because of these talents of her, specifically her talent in dance, that His Highness Sir Chamarajendra Wadeyar, the King of Mysuru, he heard about Nagarathnamma's extraordinary talent as a dancer and invited Nagarathnamma to perform for his family in the palace. And this is the Jagan Mohan Palace in Mysore, which I have to say is an extraordinarily beautiful palace. If you get a chance to go there, you should go. And when Nagarathnamma came and performed, Chamarajendra Wadeyar really loved that performance and invited her to remain in his palace and to continue performing as a court dancer. And so, apart from having received this invitation, Nagarathnamma also received the patronage of kings and princes in Travancore, Bobili and Vizianagaram. And here's a very fun fact that I think you'd like to know. Nagarathnamma's fame and the resultant invitations to perform led to her becoming one of the richest women in India, to the point that she was the very first female artist to pay income tax to the Indian government. Can you believe it? That is incredible. I mean, I know that the tax is being paid to the British government, but just imagine the magnitude of her stature and her talent and the resulting wealth that she earned, that she had to pay income tax. A woman who came quite literally from rags and catapulted towards the riches. In addition to being a prolific writer, an extraordinary dancer and a talented musician, Nagarathnamma was also a very intellectual woman, an intelligent woman. She would critically engage with various literature from various time periods, and she would hold these debate sessions and discourses sessions with the brightest minds in the cities that she would visit. And it was during one of these discourses sessions where they would actually read multiple texts together that Nagarathnamma found reference to Muddupalani and to Radhika Santawanam in a Telugu text. Now, once she found out about this, she was determined to read it. As her interest in finding and reading Radhika Santawanam grew, Nagarathnamma left no stone unturned in trying to find the manuscript. But guess what? Because of the British having banned the book in India and also most of the copies having been quite literally burned, then it wasn't very easy to access this. And that's when she tapped into the the large, vast network that she had developed over the course of the years, thanks to having got the patronage of so many kings, amongst the literate circles, amongst the circles of culture and art and literature, and ultimately, after some time, did end up getting access to the original palm leaf manuscript on which Muddupalani wrote. And having read that original in Telugu, a language that she was intimately comfortable with, she realized just how beautiful the actual verses are and decided to publish the text in its entirety. Now, of course, once she published this, she did receive quite a bit of backlash from mostly men, only men, let's face that, in the literate circles, who were considered pandits at that time. And I'm not talking pandits in the term of priest, I'm talking about panditism in the terms of intellectual superior. And because she received such backlash, there was quite a challenge for Nagarathnamma to get multiple copies of Radhika Santawanam published so that more people can read this book. One of Nagarathnamma's harshest critics was Kandukuri Veerasalingam, who basically slut-shamed Nagarathnamma and called her a prostitute and an adulteress, and said that of course you have to expect only this kind of vile garbage from a woman who is the courtesan and court dancer for multiple kings. And Nagarathnamma was not a woman to be cowed down by such harsh and untrue comments. She immediately responded to this backlash, and she questioned Kandukuri Veerasalingam about why Radhika Santawanam, which was written under the patronage of King Pratap Simha, was receiving so much flack, when in fact another book, another erotica called, again I'm so sorry if I'm going to mispronounce it, it's called Raghunath Nayaka Bhuduyamu. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. It's basically translated to A Day in the Life of Raghunatha, which focuses on the details of King Raghunatha and his sexual exploits with his courtesan Chitralekha over the course of a single night. Of course, the only difference between the Life in the Day of Raghunatha and Radhika Santawanam was that the Life in the Day of Raghunatha was written by a male writer, whereas Radhika Santawanam was written by a female writer. And so Nagarathnamma questioned this duplicity of the way both these works, which were written under the patronage of King Pratap Singha, were given different treatments, with Radhika Santawanam being treated as something vile and despicable, while any other erotic work written by a male writer being hailed as the epitome of Indian literature. Then over the course of the next few years, Nagarathnamma did not stop receiving flack from the public. The book Radhika Santawanam was considered sexually perverse and against the morals of Hindu believers. And of course, as someone who has been reading a lot of texts on Hinduism, both the epics and the general texts that lay out the rules of Hinduism, I already know that what people believe to be Hinduism today, that conventional, repressed and oppressive system that we believe Hinduism to be today, was never this way before the British came into India. So at that point in time, people thought it was sexually perverse, it was disgusting, and a lot of legal personalities, lawyers, judges, bureaucrats issued warnings against the works produced by Nagarathnamma, and in particular banned the reading of Radhika Santawanam. Despite this, Vavilla Press, one of the prominent Telugu publications of the time, did decide to publish Radhika Santawanam because they believed in the literary purity of the work. And they believed that these pearls of literature should receive their time in the light and should be read and enjoyed by people. And they charged just, I think, 6 annas, if I am correct, for this book, which was quite low, in order to make sure that the book was accessible to people. Despite all of this, Radhika Santawanam did not really get a lot of readership. In fact, Nagarathnamma's, the places where she had actually published the book, where the books were stored, were all raided by the police, and the books were again destroyed. Nagarathnamma ultimately ended up not achieving her dream of having Radhika Santawanam read by the masses during her lifetime. She died on 19th May 1952, and near her favorite personality, Tyagaraja, her samadhi was also built there. And on the year of her death, to celebrate the literary prowess of Nagarathnamma and also the other, her dancing and the music and her singing, Vavilla Press once again released a new batch of her publications of Radhika Santawanam. And it was only after independence, once the British had left, and when India was again trying to regain and reconnect with its true cultural history, that the Chief Minister of Madras, Tanguturi Prakasam, also known as Andhra Kesari, he rescinded the ban that was put by the British, and he restored Radhika Santawanam by Muddupalani to its rightful place at the top of some of the must-read Telugu literature. And that has been the really tumultuous journey of Radhika Santawanam. So this book that you see here, it looks so innocuous, it looks like just any other book, but this work has been through so much. And I did spend quite a lot of time, I think I spent around more than 20-25 minutes just describing the two women who were responsible for the publication of this book. But I really feel like that's what makes this book, first of all, a must read, because it has gone through a lot. It has gone through a lot of hardships, a lot of travails, and I think we need to honor the sacrifices that a lot of people made, and just also enjoy literature at its purest and its finest. So now that I've given you a background, a really detailed background about the women who were responsible for making sure Radhika Santawanam was published and available to the world, let's dive right into the book. So now that we have looked at the two women responsible for the creation of this book and also the publication of this book, let's dive right into the story. Radhika Santawanam chronicles the sexual relationship and the sexual dynamics between Radha and Krishna, Although this book doesn't cover the entirety of their romance, it does focus a little bit on sort of the beginnings of their romantic and sexual relationship, but the crux of the story lies at the time when Krishna marries a woman by the name of Ila Devi. Now, one of the things that I knew going into this book was that Radha is significantly older than Krishna, and so in that way this book does champion and celebrate the love between a younger man and an older woman. But what I did not know was that Radha is also considered to be Krishna's maternal aunt. She's believed to be the younger sister of Nandabala, who is the woman who raised Krishna. And Ila is also supposed to be the daughter of Kumbhaka, who is related to Radha. So essentially they're all sort of related to each other through marital lines. And this actually kind of made this work really interesting and also a little conflicting morally, because while I approve the stance of empowering relationships of varied age gaps, that is, especially in a world where we call women who are older, who are in relationships with younger men, as being cougar or as being sexually deviant. But the story between Radha and Krishna does affirm that all sorts of relationships exist and also so relationships are valid. But at the same time, we look at how Radha is considered to be the maternal aunt of Krishna, so that then the issue of incest sort of comes into play. Now, I know some of you might say that, hey, but the woman who raised Krishna was not his biological mother, so technically they're not biologically related, that's all right. Yet still, a lot of the portions of this book does refer to Krishna as being a child, or refers to the past where when Krishna was a child and Radha and Krishna started being in a relationship with each other, then essentially where she would tell him not to reveal the secret love affair between the two of them to his mother or to anyone in his family. So this sort of this particular narrative actually makes this book really conflicting and morally grey for me, which is also something that adds to the mystique of the story of Radhika Santawanam. So yeah, it's a very interesting book. Essentially, it starts out with Radha and Krishna being very much in love and engaging in a lot of passionate lovemaking. Then Radha, who has raised both Krishna and Ila in her own home, she sort of facilitates the marriage between Krishna and Ila. And initially, she's okay with it because she thinks that, hey, I can still maintain my relationship with Krishna. But as expected, Krishna starts devoting his time and attention to Ila and engages in passionate lovemaking with his wife. And this sort of brings us to the crux of the story, where we experience the grief of separation that Radha feels at being separated from Krishna, and the jealousy that she experiences at having Ila, a child that she raised, who in her mind has sort of captured the attention of her lover. So we see a lot of different themes sort of coming into play over here, that of lovers, that of extramarital affair, that of incest, that of who is the wronged woman. Is it if you look at conventional mythological stories, Radha and Krishna are supposed to be together. They are considered to be an embodiment of the deity-devotee relationship, and they are supposed to, there's a sort of like a sanctified relationship, although it falls outside the bonds of sanctified relationships according to Hindu scriptures, right? Yet, is Radha the wronged one, or is Ila, the legitimate wife of Krishna, the wronged one? So there's a lot of interesting themes here. So speaking of those themes, I have made a couple of observations that I do want to share with you, and yeah, let's dive right into them. One of the very first things that I did notice was how the book actually talks a lot about the menstrual rites and marriage rites at that time. Now, Muddupalani did live during the 1700s, so a lot of the menstrual and marriage rites were not dramatically different from what we have today in conventional, our traditional practices. But it was still very interesting to see, when Ila comes of age. And when they say come of age, we essentially mean she menstruates for the very first time, indicating her initiation into womanhood and her readiness for marriage and childbirth. So we see one section of the starting part of the book giving us a glimpse into or rather I would say detailed account of the menstrual rites that are done when a woman comes of age. So that was something really interesting, and I could relate to a lot of those rites because I underwent all of those myself when I first came of age myself. So that was something really interesting in the sense that despite it being so many centuries, we still follow those same traditions. So there's this kind of comfort in knowing that tradition is sort of continuing, and there is some comfort in tradition, in some ways. Another aspect that they showed was because Ila is now ready to get married, Radha kind of facilitates, like I said, the marriage between Krishna and Ila. And so there we see the marriage rites that take place between Krishna and Ila, the marriage rites for the woman, the marriage rites for the man, the coming together, and the marital rites for the actual union, what happens after the marriage and leading up to the time they are in the bedchamber. And there is a very explicit description of Krishna and Ila's lovemaking, the fact of Ila's being inexperienced. She is I'm not talking inexperienced in the sense of she is a virgin, so therefore traditionally virgins were prized, and I'm talking more in the sense of Ila's transformation from a naive child into a knowing woman because of the night that she spends with Krishna. Because ultimately, if you know Krishna, or you do know that he's supposed to be an excellent sexual partner. That's why a lot of people, apart from his looks, because he's really good in bed for all intents and purposes, a lot of women do fall in love with him. And so we see how it isn't just Krishna's prowess at play here, but we see how Radha instructs Krishna to be gentle with Ila and to not give in to the full force of his passions, because she is still a child. This is her very first sexual encounter. And you see in this particular instance that although Radha and Ila are technically now sort of pitted against each other for Krishna's love and Krishna's or union with Krishna, you see that initially Radha does not bear any ill will towards Ila, and in fact encourages Krishna to be gentle with her so as to not traumatize Ila and ruin her future sexual experiences. So this is something that's really interesting that I found. The second thing that I observed in the book was Radha's sexual empowerment, because Radha is known to be a very sexually awake person, and what I mean by this is that she is someone who is unabashed to explore her needs. She is a woman who knows what she wants, and she's not hesitant or afraid to ask for it. So there's a lot of sexual empowerment, sexual agency that is being shown over here. And of course, mythologically speaking, her sexual empowerment is legitimized by the fact that her sexual partner was Krishna, a deity according to Hindu myths. Yet if you look at Radha as a standalone woman as well, she is someone who's very confident in herself. She knows of her abilities and her prowesses, both inside and outside the bedroom. And she is genuinely a woman who is unafraid to ask for what she wants and go after what she wants. So that is something I think that was really wonderful to see. And of course it helps that this characterization was written or inspired by Muddupalani's own sort of confidence and her security in her position in the world. So we see a lot of pages, once again dedicated to descriptions of explicit lovemaking. And I have to tell you, this book isn't like porn. I know that a lot of people sort of shy away from Erotica, thinking that, oh, it's porn, it's going to be distasteful. But I do have to say that this book was actually very beautifully handled. There were lots, and of course, like 60% of this book is descriptions of lovemaking, right? And it is, or at least I would say 50%, because the other 50% is about Radha's inner turmoil and her sorrow. So you do see the experiences being so tastefully handled. It is quite erotic. When you're reading it, you will definitely feel the erotica and the orgasmic experiences are sort of brought are made more real, you could say, because you're reading it and it's so beautifully written. The translation is also really nice. The translator, let me just actually let you know who the translator is. Translated by Sandhya Mulchandani. So it is translated by Sandhya Mulchandani, and Sandhya has done a phenomenal job in actually translating the book. So the essence of Erotica is still felt, and it's handled so beautifully that it doesn't feel vulgar. It just feels like two people who are very much in love with each other, and they're just enjoying each other's body and also connecting soulfully through this exchange of bodily pleasure. So we see here Radha asking unabashedly of Krishna to sort of fulfill her physical needs and desires. And this is where we see how another thing of how Krishna is someone who is willing to both be a dominant partner in the relationship but also be the submissive partner. So we see Krishna as not being a man's man in the sense of the term that it's become today, where it's become like toxic masculinity. We see Krishna as a man who is secure in his manhood, secure enough to let the woman take reins, secure enough to let the woman call the shots in the bedroom, which is something really freeing and empowering, because of all the things, I always feel like when people say my son is like Krishna, they mean that, oh, he's so famous with the ladies. So they mean it in a sort of a negative way, saying that all the girls fall for him, my son is so irresistible. They say things like that when they say my son is like Krishna. I wish someone would actually read these stories of Krishna and say my son is like Krishna because he's so secure in his manhood that he would not feel the need to control the women in his life, that he would not feel the need to use sex as a weapon against the women in his life, right? I wish they would say that my son is like Krishna because he's confident that there is no threat posed to his manhood or his masculinity if he lets the women in his life or the spouse or the partner in his life to take control of the bedchamber or any other part of life, to be honest. So that is something that is very beautifully explored because this book is woman-centric, and that's something that I want to talk about, which is my next observation. Radhika Santawanam is something that caters to the female gaze as opposed to pandering to the male gaze. Now, the male gaze is something where any piece of literature you see, any sort of artwork you see, anything you see on television, everything is designed and created to pander to the needs of male audiences. And what this means is any kind of creation, whether it's written or whether it's auditory or it's visual, a lot of it today in today's world is created to please male audiences, male consumers. So therefore, that's why when you see erotica that is made for television, you see it's sometimes it borders on the vulgarity because it shows men in positions of dominance and power over women being weak and vulnerable, women experiencing pain where the pain is dubbed as pleasure. So there's a lot of things that are done to kind of uplift patriarchal values and ideas, and that basically panders to the male gaze. What pleases men and what brings men to sexual fruition, you would say. This book is not like that. Radhika Santawanam is actually something that caters to the female gaze. Like, how does a woman feel about sex and sexuality? How does she view sex with a particular person? If this is a person that she is in love with, how does sex feel for the woman? What does sex look for the woman? What does this physical intimacy entail in terms of bedroom activities, or even in terms of foreplay before the actual sexual experience? So this book is very much female centric, which is something that I really admire. And once again it goes back to Muddupalani's position as a court dancer, as a courtesan, and beyond that as a celebrated writer, as a woman in power in a male-dominated world where her views were considered to be that equal of that of her male contemporaries. So again, it's so freeing to see a piece of work that celebrates women's needs from a women's perspective, where it doesn't vulgarize or make us or slut shame a woman for having physical needs. So that is something that I found really freeing and just fascinating about this book. One of the things that you see in this book, and this is my next observation, is that the book Radhika Santawanam actually celebrates love in all its forms. It basically shows that love has no boundaries. First off, like I said, it's all about the relationship between an older woman and a younger man. So it affirms relationships across age groups. Second, it also shows extramarital affair in a not so negative light, to be very honest, which is something because see, both Radha and Krishna are married, right? Depending on what myths or stories you read, Radha is married to different people, and I'm not saying multiple partners. I'm saying there are two different names. I'm sorry, the names have sort of just slipped my mind right now. But she essentially is married to someone who, in some stories, they part amicably, and her husband goes on these tirtha yatras, and so that's when she's alone, and that's when Krishna comes into her life. In other stories, we see that Radha's husband is present, but he's a mute spectator. And quite helpless in the face of the force of the love between Radha and Krishna. And then we know Krishna does have thousands of wives, I think around 16,000 wives. Please correct me if I'm wrong. He's supposed to have thousands of wives. And so at this stage, in this book where we meet him, this is Krishna's very first marriage to Ila. And so he is a newly married man. So essentially they're both married, but and the relationship that is there between Radha and Krishna is definitely extra-marital affair, and yet the relationship is sanctified. It is considered sacred because their love is true and sure and pure and strong. And this is outside of the fact that today people believe Krishna to be a god, and therefore if it's a god, then of course, because it's a divine relationship, that sanctifies it and approves it. So even without the divineness or divine aspect, the romance between Radha and Krishna is affirmed because of its purity and its strength. The third thing which is so conflicting in this is that it does accept as a matter of fact the relationship between a child and an adult, the sexual relationship between a child and an adult. Because like I said, there are a lot of instances where Krishna is referred to as Bala Krishna. Now the word Bala means young or youth or a child. And there are a lot of instances where Krishna essentially reminisces the early days of their sexual relationship, where Radha tells Krishna, hey, don't tell your mother about what we are doing in the bedroom, let this be a secret between us. So once again it sort of shows us a different sort of relationship, that of an incestuous relationship, that of a pedophilic relationship. I'm going to go there, I'm going to say it. It is a pedophilic relationship. And this is where things actually become really murky and extremely morally conflicting for me. And that brings me to the next point. Was the relationship between Radha and Krishna a genuine relationship where both of them were consensual, consenting individuals? Or was Krishna groomed as a child by an adult Radha, and therefore because he was groomed through these sexual experiences as a child, he grew up believing that these sexual encounters were done with his consent, and therefore they were legitimate? Yep, I'm going there. I am going to question, and I know a lot of people, a lot of really religious people, really Krishna-oriented people might find fault with me for this, but I have to bring this to the table because I think this is a very valid discussion to have. Was the relationship between Radha and Krishna, like I said, legitimate? Because it started when they were much younger. Of course, there are other myths that might show Krishna as much older than what is shown in Radhika Santawanam. But Radha has for a long part been very much a part of Krishna's life when he was in Vrindavan, and those were his childhood and growing up years. So it does bring this question to mind. It does look a lot, it is incest, of course we know that, but it is also pedophilic. Even if he was not a super young child, at least he must have been a preteen or a teen when he got into a relationship with Radha. And that's still, by modern understanding, that's still a child and adult relationship. Even if we don't take this modern definition of relationships of minors and majors, of 18 being the major age and all that, because this mythology, those olden stories don't hold up to modern day scrutiny as well. Even then, it makes me question, was Krishna groomed by Radha? We know that Radha's relationship, and this is something that's affirmed across different stories, that Radha's relationship with her husband was not really great. And of course, it is possible that she has needs and she feels frustrated, and here comes Krishna, this charming, suave, really handsome guy, a handsome child, you could say, looking like a man, talking like a man with so much wisdom, but still a child nonetheless. Radha falls in love with him. She is also a beautiful, voluptuous woman. Krishna also starts admiring her, and she initiates him into sex. And of course, that is something that is mentioned in Radhika Santawanam, that she initiates Krishna into sex. And so this brings me the question of, was he groomed? Is this sexual assault? Where do lines of consent come in? Where can we draw those boundaries? Is the sexual assault masquerading as love? Are we celebrating sexual assault by an older woman, again perpetrated against a younger male child, as true love? Before I move on to my next observation, I do want to actually point out one more thing that I did think about, is the fact that was Krishna a precocious child? Because you do know that Krishna is very wise for his age. And I'm not talking about the fact that Krishna is supposed to be Vishnu's avatar, but I am talking about the fact that even as an individual, Krishna is supposed to be a very mature person for his age, a mature child for his age. So with that maturity also comes a sense of precociousness. You might have seen that, that in children, in your own lives or in your own surroundings, there are certain precocious children who talk and act like adults although they are children. So this also makes me question, apart from, because I don't want to put the blame only on Radha, because then again we would be doing this whole thing of, oh, the woman is the villain, a woman's sexuality is the bad thing, it's the evil thing, that is what leads poor innocent boys into committing sins, because then I would be pandering to the patriarchal mindset, which I absolutely do not subscribe to. So I do not believe in that. So I want to actually pose another perspective to you and ask, was Krishna a precocious child? Do you think there is, because I do believe that this is possible, because he was mature for his age, because he was older in his mind for his age, for his physical growth, it is very, very likely. And also because of the fact that Krishna does have an insatiable sexual appetite. Krishna does have a very strong and very powerful libido. Krishna does have a lot of sexual relationships with thousands of people, some of whom were his spouses, some of whom were not. So Krishna does have a large sexual appetite, insatiable sexual appetite. So it is possible that Krishna was precocious for his age, and he might have said or done something to make Radha to feel, to sort of embolden Radha to take this step forward. So I kind of feel like this is something that happens in both sides, according to both ways, from both parties, where Krishna could have been precocious and instigated the sexual relationship, and it unfortunately led to some sort of pedophilic relationship from Radha's end as well. So I think both of them are equally culpable in this scenario. So I think that is what I would want to really say and emphasize on. Both of them are equally culpable, and that's when the question of what role does consent play, how does consent look, the different forms of consent, what factors affect consent, all of these things sort of come into play over here. And one of the things that sort of makes me feel like Krishna was sort of precocious is because, when you hear a lot of stories about young Krishna, child Krishna, you would see how he had a tendency to hide the gopis' clothes when they were bathing in the river, because for him that was sort of funny. Now, why would someone hide another person's clothes and force them to come onto the land, naked in search of the clothes, without there being a precociousness to their mental frame of mind, right? Yeah, I know it's easy to justify saying, oh, he's a child, so he doesn't know that this is wrong or that this has sexual connotations. But it happens so often that you can't help but wonder what sort of mindset a younger Krishna would have possibly had when he was being surrounded by so many women, all of whom were possibly praising him for his beauty, caressing him and everything. So again, like I said, equal culpability on both sides. My next observation is how at the end of the book, the last 2-3 pages of the book, we see how Muddupalani sort of uses divine epithets for Krishna. Of course, throughout the book, these are peppered when Krishna is referred to as a god, as a deity. Krishna is referred to as Vishnu, Krishna is referred to as Rama, and sort of all these myths sort of come together to combine to give Krishna a sort of divine credence. And I sort of feel like, because especially in the last few pages of the book, where after Radha and Krishna, so like I said, Krishna gets married to Ila, he goes and completes his husbandly duties with Ila for a long while, and Radha is so upset and distraught, and when Krishna comes back to Radha, they both have a verbal fight. There is also some physical skirmishes that happen because she refuses to take him back because her self-worth and self-image and self-respect has been compromised, which I agree. But then ultimately both of them apologize to each other and they reconcile, and they have a robust and long lovemaking session, and at the end of which Radha starts calling him by divine epithets, by divine titles, divine names. And this happens really, I think, in the last 1 or 2 pages of the book. And this sort of makes me feel like Muddupalani sort of, in order to, I mean, again, this is my theory, to sort of mitigate the negative responses and criticism that might come towards her book, she has sort of brought, or sort of raised the divinity of Krishna in the last part of the book to sort of subscribe to the conventional notion of Radha Krishna's relationship being that of devotee and deity, where they move out of the mortal realm, out of the realm of human beings, out of the realm of a man and a woman who are in love and who enjoy sleeping with each other, to that of the intimate relationship that is there between a devotee and a deity. So I did feel like that was sort of a little jarring in the end, because up until that point in time, up until the last 1 or 2 pages, the relationship between Radha and Krishna does feel extremely organic. You know, it is messy, it is passionate, it is extremely vulnerable, and it's just very human. Right? So it's a human relationship. But then by sort of amping up the divinity of Krishna in the last pages, it sort of once again it tries to mitigate the impact of what the relationship between child or teenage Krishna with an much older Radha could entail if we were to, like I said, look at it from a human perspective only, with no divine influences involved. Another observation that I do want to make, which I sort of forgot to make initially, was how, you know, a large portion, like I said, of this book, you know, half of it is the erotic relationship between Radha and Krishna, and the second half is the grief that Radha experiences at being separated from Krishna. And when Krishna comes back to be with Radha again, like I said, there was a verbal sparring that happened between them. We notice how initially it sort of starts off with Krishna trying to pacify her and trying to convince her to give him another chance. But when Radha remains unmoved and she asserts that her self-respect was shattered by Krishna's behavior and she should not be treated this way, Krishna starts to sort of weaponize Radha's beauty against her. He makes these comments where basically he says that her physical form was created to torture him, how he singles out different parts of her body, like her breasts, her stomach, her buttocks, her waist, her thighs, her eyebrows. All of these he sort of singles out, and then he says a lot of negative things. He makes sort of negative connotations about these body parts, Radha's body parts, and essentially in a way weaponizes her beauty by saying that your beauty is the reason that I became your lover in the first place, and you used your beauty against me to control me and to torture me. You never really loved me. So he makes these sort of really vile accusations to her. So this once again sort of reminded me of how a lot of these behaviors are reflected even today in relationships, where men and boys have the tendency to say, you know, it is the woman's beauty that made me sin, that's the woman's beauty that made me rape her, it's the woman's beauty that made me throw acid on her face, it's the woman's beauty that because of which I murdered this ex-person who was also vying for her affection. So we use women's bodies against women in order to strip women of the agency and the freedom to protect themselves, to protect their dignity, and then sort of reduce the man's culpability in anything that has happened. And that I felt like Krishna was also doing the same thing here. At the end of the day, we do have to remember that no matter how much any of us consider Krishna as divine, he is still, in his avatar as Krishna, he is still a mortal man, and he is subject to the caprices of the society at that time, and he's subject to being brainwashed and conditioned to the patriarchal mindsets of the time. So although I do still maintain that compared to a lot of other men in the Hindu epics, Krishna is definitely better, because he's definitely someone who is very secure in his masculinity. He does talk about, you know, how Radha deliberately enticed him to ruin his life. So it shows two aspects to the same individual, where a man might be a genuinely good person, but once again he is not free from social conditioning. So that is something that I really loved, and that is something that Radha also does not stand for. She gets really angry at him, and you know, the tears and the anger and everything once again continue for a pretty long time. So it's a very interesting book, this one. So what do I think of this book officially? This book is a very sensual book. It's a very well written book. The poetry is very soft and approachable. It's not vulgar. The descriptions of lovemaking are quite erotic, quite sensual. It does kind of pull you in a very gentle way, and it is a very nicely written book. But of course, it's also a very conflicting book, like I said, because of themes of incest, pedophilia, possible grooming, precociousness of Krishna, a weaponization of woman's beauty against her. So a lot of conflicting themes. I think that's what makes this book really good, though. It celebrates love in all forms. It celebrates secureness in masculinity, because like I said, Krishna, it doesn't mind being both the dominant partner, but he also doesn't mind being the submissive partner as well. Because for Krishna, it was not about his own sexual satisfaction, but it was about making sure that Radha had a good time. It was about making sure that Ila had a good time. And when I compare this to Kumara Sambhavam, which also I reviewed a couple of months ago, I will link that down in the description box, we see the relationship between Shiva and Parvati play out a little differently, where although once again they too were very much in love with each other, we see Shiva's focus being his own sexual gratification. And I did mention in the review of my Kumara Sambhava, where Shiva sees that Parvati is extremely tired, her body is battered and bruised after that rough lovemaking, and yet he claims her once again multiple times because he is not satisfied and he wants to continue enjoying Parvati's body. And I don't see the same thing repeating with Krishna's relationship with either Ila or Radha, because although the sex is rough with Radha, it is something where Radha is given that freedom to claim her own desires, to be the dominant partner and to seek fulfillment. Similarly, Krishna slowly works with Ila to get her comfortable with the sexual experience, and then turns on the full force of his passion, where once again he allows Ila to sort of take control of their union and feel fulfilled. So we do see these very positive things that are there in this book about, and I think this book is definitely a lot more positive in terms of its depiction of sexual unions and sexual relationships and sexual dynamics, and this book is a celebration of how sex can be a really good thing, but for two people who come together and who are treating each other on an equal footing, where they give each other the opportunity to experience pleasure on their own terms and together as a couple, of course. So in that way, this book is a celebration of physical love, and at the same time it is as conflicting, like I said, because of all the reasons that I mentioned, and that this moral ambiguity about love is what I really love about Hindu mythology in particular, because although in today's world we want to sanitize everything and show everything as should, right? The reality is that Hindu mythology has never been this should and sanctified. Hindu mythology has been very messy, with all characters being all shades of wrong and all shades of grey, to be very honest. And I think this book really kind of focuses on that it's neither the purest of love, nor is it the morally the worst kind of love either. So I would say that this book actually celebrates love in all forms. So yeah, I would definitely say this is one of the best books to read when it comes to exploring different perspectives of the epics. It is genuinely a really very interesting book. The translation by Sandhya Mulchandani has been done very well. It is very accessible. There are not many difficult words that you kind of struggle with. Even for those of us who don't know a lot of those words, or who are coming into this narrative for the very first time, coming across the story for the first time, there is a detailed index with a list of words and meanings given at the back, in the back pages. And there's also a very detailed bibliography with a list of works that Sandhya Mulchandani has referenced in order to create the translation for this book as well. So there are quite a few gems in that if you want to take a look at those books as well. So yeah, this brings me to the end of this review. Radhika Santawanam, The Appeasement of Radhika by Muddupalani, fought for fervently by Nagarathnamma and translated by Sandhya Mulchandani and reviewed by Nisha Prakash. 4 women who are all affirming this book as an excellent read. So go pick it up. If you've read this book before, do let me know in the comments what you thought of this book, and I'd love to hear from you. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.